What is new today? New today is the challenge. It's like the little piece of sand in your shoe. It always bothers you, or something stuck between your teeth. You cannot get rid of it, So there's this thing. Listen, Adrian. Turns out that there's great agreement between these predictions and all measurements of animal locomotion, flyers, runners, and swimmers. And they have to do with the fact that all these things that move are performing effort, except the fish. The fish are not fighting gravity, because I told you last time, everybody knows, and I told you, when you hear the expression "everybody knows," you should, I was not going don't reach for a weapon just to walk away. You should question that, quote unquote. Everybody knows that gravity doesn't matter to the fish. In fact, the scientific literature is full of scientific publications about all sorts of things, from animals to vehicles, robots today, neglecting gravity in the simulating of aquatic movement. Well, good for those folks, except that the fish, their speeds, and rhythms agree with this theory that begins with this trade-off between overcoming drag horizontally and lifting weight vertically. And here comes a very brief story of this idea, meaning this kind of work. Shortly after I figured out this Constructal law, I wrote the first full-length book about it. It's called Shape and Structure. And in that book, just as a piece of fun, at the very end, I wrote this theory for flyers. So that's year 2000. Because of the book, I was 4 years later, in 2004. It is a story of the fact that sometimes, not often, good things happen in academia. So 4 years later, a famous professor of anatomy from the University of Bern in Switzerland, his name is Ewald Weibel, who just passed away, invited me to a workshop of biologists in Switzerland, in a town called Ascona. And Ascona is on the border with Italy, meaning southern Switzerland, northern Italy. You've heard of Lago Maggiore. There are these glacial lakes. This is the biggest. Anyway, so there are all these biologists there. I was the only engineer. And I talked about lots of stuff, including how to predict flying. And another famous biologist who is still alive, his name is Jim Martin from Penn State, came to me after my presentation and said, listen, what you showed should be easy to extend to runners and swimmers, he said. And so with him, I did the thing I showed you. And 1 year later, we were ready to write a paper and publish it. But we did not have the full story, because we couldn't figure out why the fish were agreeing with the data. I mean, why the data for the fish were agreeing with the theory. You see that? And so now we're in the year 2005. In fact, throughout the fall, scratching our heads. Yeah, and next comes a little bit of something that maybe is in every single one of you. vestiges or leftovers from pagan life that existed before bigger ideas such as religion. It's called superstition or omens. At the end of that fall, it occurred to me what the answer should be, but I was afraid to talk about it. And then on the 17th of December of that year, I was driving to Duke, listening to the radio, and that day, the radio here in North Carolina was celebrating the anniversary of the flight at Kitty Hawk, the first human flight, the Orville and Wilbur Wright brothers. I said, hey, wait a minute, today is an important day for animal locomotion, you see. And this got me into this realm of, it's a little bit like serendipity, but it's much, much older. And then it occurred to me that at this meeting in Ascona, we were hosted. The meeting was held in a conference center up on a hill called Monte Verità. Which means the mountain of truth. And I put these two things together. I said, maybe I should start talking about this. So I shared this hunch with Jim Marden. And we ended up publishing the paper. All right. So what is the aha? It is that, look, gravity doesn't matter to the fish. Gravity doesn't matter to all sorts of things in the water, as long as those things do not move. But if the body moves, and we called it M, and the water, of course, everybody knows is here. If the body moves, not only that, but because the body moves, a volume of water in front of it has to be displaced. Where would the water go? Meaning a body of water of the same size as the body itself, because they are of the same density. And here is the lack of symmetry on Earth. There's a difference between up and down. We take it for granted, but we don't talk about it. But here you see it. This water that's displaced can only go upward. You see it as a bulge if the fish is moving horizontally in shallow water. You don't see it very well the deeper the swim. In fact, there's the technology of submarine is oriented in the direction of traveling deep, so that the bulge that the submarine produces is less and less detectable. Too bad for the submarine, because the higher and higher the spy satellite that looks from high above, the better the ability of that instrument to detect a bulge of a great radius and minute height, time averaged, on the surface of the ocean. So everything that moves underwater is lifting the surface of that water layer, because that's how gravity really works. Gravity is what holds this layer where it is. So that's how we end up with the very short conclusion that yes, the swimmer in motion is a weightlifter. But I knew that. As a kid going fishing, you put the bait obviously near the surface, And then when the fish come to the bait, the water looks like the water is boiling because the fish are all swimming in the vicinity of that place and creating waves. By the way, the waves that you see generated by swimmers are what I'm talking about here. So with this, let's go to Revelation. The chapter is closed, meaning flying, running, and swimming are all about the same thing, which is movement horizontally on Earth, meaning under gravity, in this direction of greater access. So what happened after this killer move against the common view that gravity doesn't matter to the fish? Well, it went disrespected. Very few of these aquatic movement biologists and robotics folks have bought this idea that lifting water is an impediment to locomotion in water. And so, probably I'm repeating myself. It pays, when you make a discovery, it pays to question yourself. So, is there another way to show that what I figured out those days is even more obvious? And here is the most recent version of questioning myself. Did any of you lived close to the water? Okay. Yeah, here's a question. Why does the pushed boat stop? Here's the question. You push the boat in the water, hopefully everybody, the person in the boat is safe, and the boat slides on water, and then it stops. So, why the pushed boat stop? I asked the question because I have fluid mechanics in my head, and I know that if the only force restraining the boat progress is drag, then as the speed decreases, the drag force decreases. And that on and on and on, meaning that the boat will move, slower and slower, but will not stop. Let's go through that analysis this way. Here's the boat, this proverbial capital M, moving this way to speed v, and restrained by a force F, which you know is a drag coefficient, and then the body length scale, which is L squared. That's the frontal area that, meaning perpendicular to the direction of motion, and then 1/2 rho v squared. We neglect 1/2. About the drag coefficient, we have to decide whether the movement is fast enough for the flow regime to be turbulent, meaning Reynolds numbers. So here's a fork in the road. If the Reynolds number based on V and L is greater than 100, then this drag coefficient is a constant of order 1. At much lower speeds, the drag coefficient goes as a Reynolds number to -1. And so there are two ways of checking what happens to this body. I'm showing you what happens in the first case, which is right after the impulse. And the other one is essentially the same, but a little bit more complicated. So you can do it, if you want. You can do it, or you'll see it in an article I wrote recently about this entire story. Let's see what happens. Well, it means that the force, the restraining force, is, in this case, is scales as L squared and then rho V squared. And this force is responsible for the decelerating of the body. In other words, if you look at the order of magnitude things, mass, speed, time, and then all of that, you get that, let me write it, that the speed over time should vary as V squared. You're right. So that means that the speed should decrease as 1 over time. I can make a drawing right here. Here's the speed, and here's time, and here's the 1 over time, which is the equilateral hyperbola, which shows that if drag is the only restraining force or effort, then this motion will go on forever under this regime of turbulent wake behind the body. Why does the pushed boat stop? You know the answer, because the boat is also lifting water, you see. So let's see how, taking into account this overlooked effect, the effect of lifting water, how that is responsible for stopping the boat. I don't know whether you get to be in my shoes as you watch me telling you these stories, but it's really exciting to ask questions that should have been dealt with by others before, you know. Before I suffer from the opposite. When people leave me alone, I run into this kind of stuff, and I laugh and I laugh and I laugh. But don't take that as gospel. If you look at black and white movies from World War II, yes, there are movies of soldiers climbing hills, going straight up, and doing that very fast, because they're actually trained to do it that way. And to climb a hill through the vegetation fast, you have to be very, very careful that you're not injured by the bushes. And you have to climb walking very bent forward, at almost close to the ground. All right, so let's see what happens next. Well, what happens next is, already, here's the boat. And this time I'll make the boat right under the water surface. Oh, the boat is on the water surface, see? So this is more like a barge loaded with say, sand or coal. This is M. And you are the pusher. You just push the boat with a velocity V, which means that you deposit in the boat kinetic energy equal to 1/2 mv squared. That's what you did, okay? And then the boat slides to the right, and in so doing, it lifts a body of water of the same size. but the boat keeps going. You see? And that means that as it goes, it continues to lift water. How much water? Well, this is a three-dimensional image, meaning with a dimension perpendicular to the blackboard equal to the length scale of the body. So I'll draw those things here. So that's L, and then over the top, L. So at this point, meaning in my drawing, I drew the progress made by the pushed boat to a particular distance called, let's call it Lx, or L travel. That's what happened. The boat has lifted a prism of water. How much? How much was lifted? In other words, where did this kinetic energy go? It went into storing itself as gravitational potential energy in this higher body of water. How much? So that's potential energy. And you know that means the mass times g times the lifting, the elevation, which in this case is L. The mass is obviously the density of water, which is the same as the density of the body. And then there's volume, which is L travel, and times this cross-section, which is L squared. And then G, so that was for the mass, G, and L. Feel free to report me to the authorities that I employ math that is not very complicated. What do we see here? The density times L to power 3 is, I'll put it here, and then G and L travel. This is M, the mass of the body. Potential energy equals kinetic energy. And you are the one who did the pushing, by the way, so you can cancel. You did that. And because your effort is finite, so is the distance traveled. You heard the expression, so-and-so is making waves. You've heard that? Well, to make waves means to exert an effort. People who do not work at it do not make waves. Same here. You worked, you made waves. And the waves obviously dissipate. They dissipate your meager effort. And that is why every pushed boat stops. And this is, yeah?
No, question, analogous question. What is the pendulum stops meaning? To use this?
The pendulum?
Yes.
We'll get to that next. Pendulum stops because of the drag of the ball at the end of the
yes,
of the stick.
If the drag follows the same model, then it should decay instead of stopping. If you use the same argument of the drag force following that formula.
The pendulum pendulating in water would be the same sort of thing, okay?
Yes.
Meaning it will stop because the so-called work against, in that case, work against, by the way, the pendulum,
What if the pendulum is in air?
forget about
Oh,
air.
it's in lifting.
Yeah, you're going back to flying here. Look, by the way, this is a very good thing you bring up. You can tell this joke, this one, with the pendulum in water, okay? The pendulum in water, just like the pendulum in air, will pendulate, will swing forever, slower and slower because of drag. You see that? But that is if you only take into account the effort to overcome drag. But if the pendulum is in water, then you are even more encouraged to account for the work of lifting the medium, and then you'll see that every pendulum must stop, not keep oscillating to infinity. I'm not finished with questioning myself. So after this little thing, before I published it, I said, Adrian, are you right about this? Why don't you experiment with a boat? Go ahead and push it and ask. Anybody met Hamad, my former student? He came here during the first lectures. Yeah, I asked Hamad to make a little movie of the pushed boat. Yeah, except I don't have a boat. So I told Hamad, listen, I'm going to go in the swimming pool and I'll push myself from the side of the pool forward, and you film me as I glide. And every time my gliding ended, I was dead in the water, I was, every run was identical to the preceding runs. So I can experiment with, with zero cost if you are that curious.